Sonic Rush was released back in 2005. At this point, Dimps had already made the Advanced trilogy, so they already had a few Sonic games under their belt that were considered pretty good, or at least serviceable among the people who played them. So it makes sense that they'd be the ones to also work on the games for the next handheld generation, the Nintendo DS. It was a good time to put out a new game too, seeing as how the DS had only been out for a year when it was released. During an interview in the 2005 Tokyo Game Show, Akinori Nishiyama said that for this game, they wanted to keep the simple gameplay from the 2D games while adding some new elements from the 3D titles. What's interesting about this is that you can kind of already see that in the Advanced series. The gameplay started from a balance of speed and platforming, and transitions over to gameplay for more of just maintaining high-level speeds, which is similar to a gameplay you'd see in a game like Sonic Adventure 2. It influenced so many titles after, to the point where, even now, in Sonic Frontiers, it makes its way as a main mechanic. In a way, this game changed the course of Sonic as a whole. So, what am I trying to say? That Sonic Rush is this amazing game? I mean, I personally enjoyed it a lot, and part of the reason I'm making this video is to explain why, but I'm also trying to say something else. Sonic Rush was incredibly innovative. Yes, at the time, but also a little bit now. And to understand that, I have to start by talking about the boost itself. Despite the gameplay of Rush being so unique at the time, Sonic Rush in a lot of ways feels like a semi-sequel to the Advance games, and you can see this a lot in the gameplay. Sonic can do all the moves he could in those games, the spin dash, the miniature air dash, and he even still has the boost state from Advance 3. But now, Sonic has the normal boost. By pressing Y, Sonic will automatically go to his top speed and destroy every enemy in his path. It's such a cool idea. He's already super fast as is, but now he's so fast that he could just knock every enemy out of his way. If it sounds OP, it is. Especially because a lot of levels are designed around this, putting a lot of segments for you to just bulldoze through. But of course, there are exceptions. Sonic has a boost meter, and despite there being 3 total levels of it, this thing depletes really fast. If you hold down the boost, you will go through it very quickly. However, refilling it is also super easy. If Sonic bounces on a spring or anything that sort of flings him in the air, he can perform tricks by mashing the jump button. And you'll know this because you'll start doing shit in the air while a crowd starts screaming and cheering. And yes, it happens every time, but you'll get used to it. And on top of that, checkpoints and certain capsules also refill it, so you probably won't be running out of it that often. If you get enough boost to completely fill the meter, however, you will temporarily gain an infinite boost. But again, this doesn't last very long, unless you keep doing tricks. I think I've never kept it long enough to verify that, but yeah. And all of these things make for a genuinely fun and exhilarating gameplay system. In Advance 2 and 3, exploring was still a thing you could do, but it felt kind of out of place because of the large emphasis placed on speed. But here, the gameplay feels completely designed around going fast. Most high-level pathways aren't found by good platforming, but by split-second decisions. That sounds potentially annoying, but because boosting through these levels is fast regardless, trying them again isn't a hassle. And while this game does lack the momentum-based physics of the classic games, it's not really a problem because you aren't ever really thinking about momentum while playing. This isn't a momentum-based Sonic game, it's a new one that doesn't require any of that stuff. I personally really did enjoy this for the most part. I have a lot of positive feelings when it comes to the gameplay itself. However, when it comes to the level design, that's where I have mixed feelings. All of the levels have their own gimmicks, which is actually really cool. Giving every level a unique gimmick gives them their own identity, and there's a lot of genuinely cool ones. My favorites are the ones that involve maintaining and using your speed. Some examples of this is the time stop one from Night Carnival Zone, the cannons and rockets from Deadline Zone, and pretty much every gimmick from Water Palace Zone. All of these gimmicks keep the player fast, whether that be literally just continuously going fast or fast on your feet. Sometimes these gimmicks will even reward you, whether that be with another path or a bunch of capsules if you manage to master it. This is all really great, but these gimmicks are also where the game falls a bit. The game punishes you for messing up a lot of the time, and that's usually in the form of death. Sonic Rush kills you a lot, and it makes those difficult gimmicks a lot more frustrating. This UFO from Altitude Limit Zone is hard to control as is, and it's always placed above an instant death pit. The parachute in this same zone isn't too hard to control, but if you get hit, you fall and can't recover, and it's usually placed over an instant death pit, and I think you could put the two together. Yeah, that zone wasn't so good because of that stuff. Even the gimmicks I enjoyed aren't shielded from this problem. That rocket from Deadline Zone was cool when I knew how to control it, but overall, it's difficult to figure out. Because of that, I found myself dying, to crashing and falling, and yeah, you get it. And this instant death problem isn't just an issue with the gimmicks. The advanced games had a lot of them, and Rush has them as early as the second zone. You won't really boost into one, but sometimes you can boost into a gimmick or into a platforming area, and the game will expect you to quickly get back on your feet. I know making quick decisions is a part of gameplay, but this seems like a very harsh punishment for a very small slip-up. And another thing, sometimes you'll need to do regular jump-to-jump platforming. This isn't a big deal because Sonic has a stop-and-go feel, so you'll never slip off a platform unless you're holding forward, but a lot of the time these platforming sections are over death pits, so it doesn't really feel fair. Some part of me thinks that all of this insta-death stuff being here is to make the game a bit harder, and in some ways it is. Sometimes it feels cheap, but to the game's credit, it does give a sort of challenge that you don't see in a lot of other Sonic games. Mastering the gimmicks and making those quick decisions does feel very rewarding. Because you're dying so much, lives are also a lot more valuable, so getting them is a lot more important. However, I'm aware that while I can get around and find ways to enjoy this, not everyone can. And because of that, I don't think this design is completely ideal for a Sonic game, especially one about going super fast. At the very least, I think there could have been a much better difficulty curve to warm players up and allow them to get really good. Then you could start throwing all of the really hard shit later. I don't really dislike it, but I think they could have done a lot better. So yes, while the level design struggles a bit, I don't think it's enough to pull down the game entirely. There's a lot to value here outside of just the gameplay, one of them being the visual design. Sonic has always had good visual design, but Sonic Rush manages to separate itself from all the other games with how it weaves its visual design into its gameplay. A good example of this is the art style. While most 2D games before this were able to create its art style through its sprite animation, Rush has to go with a different idea because it's using 3D models with 2D backgrounds. However, it still manages to create one that's really appealing by sticking to an overall style through the DS's limitations. This is the Sonic model we see throughout the entire game, and just by looking at it we're able to see a specific kind of style they were going for. The proportions of his head and his hands compared to his body are giving me a cartoonish chibi style. I know, very general descriptions, but I'm not very good at explaining this stuff, so you're just gonna have to go with it. But the edges on the model also give Sonic his edge. I'm sorry. A similar edge to what we see in Sonic normally. So yeah, while he's a little bit of a cute guy in this game, he's got a little bit of attitude. This is what I personally took away from what they could have been going for just by his model. And if we look at his dialogue sprites, we can see that whatever choices they made for his model were very much intentional. The concept art is kind of different from this, but at the very least, this is how he's meant to be portrayed in the game, and we can see this all over with Blaze and Eggman, and even in the levels themselves. The foreground and backgrounds also use flat and simplistic colors, similarly to Sonic, and you could see this especially during the boss fights, where despite everything looking more detailed, it still remains relatively simplistic. I'm sure if they made this for the Wii or something, it'd look much better, but it was made for the DS, and because of that, it seems like they decided to stick to a distinct art direction that would look good for the system. Another great display of the style are the subtle details in the gameplay. Stuff like the characters actually breakdancing after beating a level, that multicam thing that happens after you get that last hit on a boss, the title screen with how the words flip onto screen. These are things that the game doesn't need, but it's added to reinforce a consistent style and make the game fun to engage with. If what I talked about before wasn't intentional, this definitely was, which tells me that Dimps knew what they were doing. Now, while the art and visual direction is great enough, I feel another big factor that makes these two work is the sound design. I mean, two things. First is the sound effects themselves, which sound crunchy and satisfying. I wrote that in there. I think I was just trying to come up with words to describe sound effects. They just sound really nice, I guess. That's what I meant. A great example of this is the boost itself. I don't think the boost would feel nearly as powerful as it does if it weren't for the fact that it actually sounds like you're obliterating the sound barrier. Again, it's the smaller things that reinforce these feelings. However, if we're going to talk about sound design, we gotta talk about the music. When I say there isn't a single bad track in this game, I mean it. All of it's great stuff, but it also does a great job at elevating the gameplay. The feeling of stylishly blasting through every level is something you can hear through the music.
what you need. And you don't stop, you proceed, 'cause this is what you need. And you don't stop, you proceed.
The music is not only an identification of this game, but it's an identification of its characters. Something I see a lot of people say about this music is that it really captures what Sonic was during this time, and I totally agree. This sounds like music he'd listen to while running around these levels. And of course, I have to mention the small details within the music. A light example of this is that both songs I sampled actually sample pieces of the game's themes. That's just something I like personally. A much bigger, and honestly better, example of how these details can really elevate gameplay is in the boss music. When you're on your last few hits, the music will pinch up to tense the situation. Dimps did this with the advanced games, and I'm super happy they brought it back here. It works especially well for that button mashing segment during Blaze's boss fight. The song that plays really captures how much energy you're putting into beating her. A lot of energy into mashing those fucking buttons. All of this is to say, I'd love to see them take another hack at something similar to this sometime. I mean, I've always loved Sonic music, but this one was just really unique, so why not? I don't know. Speaking of boss fights, something I tend to notice when playing the classic games is that the boss fights are kind of easy once you know how to beat them. And that's totally fine, I still love them, but it makes those super easy ones a little bit forgettable. I don't think Rush exactly fixes that problem, but I do think it solves the easy problem. Because, these bosses are hard. At first it starts off kind of easy, but as you go through the game, those bosses get progressively more challenging, to the point where Sonic Rush's last boss, the one before the Supersonic one, is probably one of the hardest bosses I've ever played in a Sonic game. Now, similarly to what I said about the level design, this challenge may not be for everyone, but unlike the situation that I was talking about before, I actually think these bosses are really well designed regardless. These bosses are based around only being hit at certain points during their attacks, or while they're attacking, meaning that spam hitting is impossible anymore. Now you have to actually learn the boss's patterns, especially because, as it goes on, the boss itself will get more difficult. It may sound hectic, but the bosses are actually kind of easy to learn, and that's because all of them usually surround a single concept, so a bunch of their attacks won't be too hard to figure out. It's the dodging part that's challenging, at least at first. Now, these aren't my favorites in the series, but I definitely think these were a step in the right direction. If you're willing to pull through the difficulty, you'll be rewarded with some fun, or at the very least, some interesting boss fights. And I think that's worth mentioning, especially because you're going to have to fight them twice if you're going for completion. Yeah, there's 2 campaigns in this game. That's the transition to the next part. So after beating the first level with Sonic, you unlock Rush's new playable character, Blaze the Cat. Now, she doesn't play too differently from Sonic. She can still boost and do the spin dash. The only new stuff that she has is this short glide in the air and her dashes, which go farther than Sonic's. These moves don't really add much to the game outside of saving me from death a few times or nabbing me a high path every now and then, so I don't think the gameplay is anything crazy, but I think where Blaze really exceeds is in her design. I mean, just look at her. She is a sick looking character. It reminds me of the attitude Sonic gives off, with the expressive edges on her body and the determined and confident body language, but where Sonic looks energetic and cheery, Blaze looks calm and collected. And you could see this in the game too when comparing her to Sonic. The way she runs is a lot more controlled, also could be a reference to Sonic's old running animation, which I love. Her dash feels a lot smoother than Sonic's. Even the way she dances is expressive to her character, flipping smoothly into frame and into her pose. It's all here to show you who she is, which, to be fair, is something that this series is particularly good at when it comes to characters. But Blaze is one of my favorites, so I'm giving her extra points. This, funnily enough, actually moves us on to the last thing I really liked about this game, the story. Each campaign follows their respective character in their own story. It begins after the fight with Eggman. He drops the Chaos Emerald lookalike and dashes off. Before Sonic could do anything, Blaze swoops in and takes the emerald for herself. She thanks Sonic and leaves without any explanation of what Eggman was doing with it. This makes Sonic confused, and he only gets more confused in the next level after he meets a guy who looks exactly like Eggman. This is Eggman Nega, the new antagonist, and he is also an anomaly if you couldn't tell. Most of Sonic's campaign is him and Tails putting together what's going on. At first, we only know something bad is happening to the space-time continuum, but as we progress through the story, we get hints as to who these two actually are, and eventually, it's all revealed. Blaze and Nega are actually from an alternate dimension. What the fuck? Did my phone just Blaze and Nega are from an alternate dimension. At least I think they are. I don't know, the lore on these two are really weird. They could also be from the past or the future, whatever the fuck. I don't know, we're just gonna go with what the game told me. This new Eggman has somehow used the Soul Emeralds, the Chaos Emeralds of their dimension, to travel over to Sonic's world and team up with the normal Eggman to use both the Soul and Chaos Emeralds to rule the universe, which will obviously cause some kind of interdimensional destruction. I'm saying this like it's normal because it is. I mean, we've seen this kind of thing in Sonic a lot, especially now. I don't think the main appeal is through the plot. I think it's through the characters, and that starts with Blaze. Blaze's story is the coolest thing ever. Are you ready to hear the story? After exploring a bit, Blaze meets Cream the Rabbit, and Cream guides her around Sonic's world, where she shows her all of her friends. That's it. I mean, sure, Blaze's original intention was to find the rest of the Soul Emeralds with Cream's help, but I mean, this is the objective that's more interesting to me. I'm not kidding when I say this is a genuinely smart way to write a story for a character like this, because what other way would you convince someone to open up and make friends than showing them Sonic's friends and seeing how cool they are? With Cream the Rabbit as the tour guide. I mean, who want to tour Sonic's world with Cream the Rabbit? What's that? You think Cream's annoying? Come here, you little. And while Blaze still remains mostly distant, seeing her open up little by little is really nice. But, like I mentioned before, she's still rather insistent on doing everything by herself. Now, you could just say that this is just to have a cool boss fight between Sonic and Blaze, and that may be true, but I think it shows more about who Blaze is as a person. It's not the making friends part that she doesn't like, it's them being involved with her that gets her anxious. We find out that Blaze is a princess and the protector of the Soul Emeralds, so she often isolates herself so the people around her don't get hurt. It's a very selfless act, but as we see through this story, she does want to have friends, and Sonic shows her that she can. The two play the same role in their respective dimensions, so it makes sense that Sonic would have sympathy towards her, even after they fight. This isn't an insanely deep story. What I'm talking about isn't insanely deep. In fact, I could really just be reaching here, but if I'm able to get that from the story, then it means I think they did a good job at characterizing them. At the very least, it means that they can create really nice moments between these characters. Want to hear my favorite example? No? Shut the fuck up. After the two fight, Sonic kind of turns into a supporting role for her, and Blaze starts to rely and trust him. It's only the last bit of the game where this happens, so we don't get to see that much of it, but the small moments where we can see it are really charming. For one, I could feel it during the actual final boss while the two are relaying against their respective Eggmans. Feels like they both already know they can beat Eggman, it's just a matter of fighting them and it's a matter of communication, so they really aren't worried about anything. But the moment that really stood out to me is at the very end of the game in this interdimensional void. Sonic and Blaze are saying their goodbyes, where they both assure each other that they'll see each other again. And as this is happening, the two are holding hands, but even after they say goodbye to each other, they don't let go. Not until they have to. It's a small little gesture between the two, but it made me appreciate these characters and their relationship even more than before. Hold on, okay? Hold on. Me editing here right now, right? I just realized that while I was playing this game and kind of thinking about the story, I realized that I actually kind of enjoy this ship, which is weird because I don't ever really care about that stuff, and I find it kind of, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I'll just resume back. Now, like I mentioned before, This isn't the greatest story in the world. It's not a big deal. We see a lot of moments like this in the Sonic series. Sonic is a very heartfelt franchise, but this moment just really stuck out to me personally, and it made sticking around for the story more valuable. And to me, it means they did more than they had to. And I think that's especially impressive for what they were working with. And overall, I think that's something I could say about the entire game. I never played this game before this video, but like I said a few times before, I was impressed by how much detail they were able to put into such a small package. As much as I love Mania and that entire style, that entire gameplay, I'd love for them to return to some of the ideas here. When people think of 2D Sonic, they think of classic Sonic, which is fine because I love classic Sonic, but we don't get to see a lot of these kind of games anymore. I'd love to see them return to this with a new direction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a boost game, it could really be any kind of Sonic game. I just like to see them pick up where they left off here. It has fun and unique gameplay, with a great artistic design behind its visuals and style, and a surprisingly good story. Only thing that needs tweaking is the level design, but that's really easy to figure out. They've figured it out already with, all of these games that came out after it. I like to think that they took inspiration from this formula for a reason. I think they really had something cool here. And on top of that, they should totally bring this game back. I mean, seeing as how Blaze is still kind of a relevant face in Sonic, and considering that this was the first Boost game, it makes sense to bring it back. Maybe give it a small remaster or something. I don't know. Also, I really think that these special stages need to be rebuilt for a normal controller. Let me tell you guys something, alright? I have to admit something. I emulated for this. I did not play this on an original Nintendo DS. I would have, but, recording on a DS is hard. I mean, and on a 3DS. I don't know how to do it yet, or ever, probably. So I decided to play on an emulator. And I tried to get all the Chaos Emeralds, because, of course, I'm getting all the Chaos Emeralds. It's fucking Sonic, I'm talking about it. When I tell you that these are some of the hardest special stages I've ever played, and it's not because they're actually hard, it's because I played with a fucking mouse. Yes, I played with a mouse, because there's no other way. It was built for like the tap, like the touch screen. You can't do that on computer. I don't even think like DS4, which you could use like the PlayStation 4 touchpad. I don't even think that would work. So if you play this game, try your best to play it on a goddamn Nintendo DS, because that shit is fucking insane. Okay, just please put this on PC. Change up the special stages, please. But yeah, I'd actually really love to see this come to console and Steam. That and Rush Adventure, of course. If you're a fan of Sonic and you haven't checked out this game, you totally should, because despite its simplicity, Sonic Rush is really cool. Hey guys, this video took me a really long time. And it's not because I think this is like my secret masterpiece or anything. It's actually just a lot of stuff happened in between when I started this video and since like right now. And watching it back and seeing it be actually kind of competent is pretty nice. I mean, I still see a lot of problems, like I wish I could redo or rewrite a bunch of these lines, but I mean, I don't want to be doing this video forever, so... And it's a video about Sonic Rush. I don't know if it's worth, that much time. So whatever that next project is gonna be, probably not gonna be about Sonic Rush Adventure, seeing as how I just spent like a really long time listening to myself talk about Sonic Rush. Probably in the future sometime, but not anytime soon. I'll see you guys then. But as for now, again, thanks for watching.